What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Optimal, presented by FTN Network and presented by FTN Daily. Here for a fun one this time. We're here on the first Friday show of the Optimal so far. So obviously it's been the first week that we've done this. So it's going to be the first Friday. And Friday is going to be really fun in my opinion. We're going to be doing some lineup building, some strategy stuff for the upcoming NFL DFS week. If you guys don't know, we do the NFL Live show Friday night, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm ready to go for this week. So I figured it'd be a great time to bring that to the show. We're going to pull out the optimizer, build some lineups with it, run through some of the stuff that I'm thinking for the week, and talk about some strategy stuff for NFL Week 5. So really pumped for that. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, you want to talk about the slate at all, shoot a chat message or whatever question in whatever message board you're watching on, whether it be Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube. Can see all those here, and I'll pull them up to the screen and we can run through those, chat about them live on the show. We will break down some of this week 5 goodness. Last night, Thursday Night Football, I had higher expectations for the game than what we saw. Obviously, it was a bit of a bummer from a betting and a DFS perspective when a guy that I was pretty high on and had a lot of exposure to in DFS and bet on him for his overs and some of his props got hurt. Russell Wilson, pretty gruesome looking injury. Hit his hand on Aaron Donald's hand while he was making a throw, and his finger could not be bent back to like the normal position, and he just never looked right. He did try to play after they popped it back in place, but then eventually he just made way for Geno Smith, who just actually looked pretty decent. I'm not gonna lie, Geno Smith looked all right, except for that last play where Lockett did fall down on the interception, but still, he did look a little bit uncomfortable when he got under pressure, but he was able to lead the team down there twice for points. One was for a touchdown, one was for a field goal. And so, yeah, I thought that was pretty impressive for Geno Smith. However, it was a bummer from a betting perspective and a DFS perspective. I will say the Darrell Henderson call also, the guy that I talked up yesterday on this show as being one of my favorite plays and one of my favorite captain plays. He ended up getting a lot more ownership at the captain spot than I thought. I was pretty surprised by that. I thought we would see Alex Collins get a lot of the captain ownership. Guys like even Cooper Kupp and DK Metcalf would get a lot of the captain ownership. But really, Darrell Henderson, I think in a lot of the contests that I was in, was at like 20% captain ownership, which is very high, a lot higher than I thought. And he had a good game. He scored and had, I think it was 70-plus yards and like one catch for about 17 yards. But Sony Michel came in and he vultured a touchdown, and Darrell Henderson got banged up in I think the first drive or one of the first couple of drives. So I'm over there flexing his arm, trying to, I don't know, regain feeling. Maybe he had a stinger or something. And that made way for Michel, who actually looks pretty good. So they kept him in there. They ended up about splitting carries evenly, which is not what I saw coming there. Again, can't help to think that was sort of because of that injury early on that kind of gave a chance for Sony Michel to crack the lineup a couple of times there. So that was a bit of a bummer, but he did still score a touchdown, and he did have a pretty solid game. So overall, he was fine as well. DK Metcalf and Robert Woods were the stars of the show. Woods wasn't able to find the end zone, but he was finding the ball every other play, it seemed. I think he had 12 catches for 150-plus yards on like 16 or 17 targets. So when they came out and said they were trying to get him more targets, they were not kidding. They were not kidding at all. So Robert Woods had a big game. Good to see that. Obviously his best game of the season so far, but wasn't saying much. But DK Metcalf scored twice. Didn't quite get the 100-yard bonus. I believe he was at 98 or 99 yards. So that was a bummer if you were a DK Metcalf roster like myself. But again, didn't really matter for me because I had a lot of Russell Wilson. So again, fun game, but probably a little bit below expectations. I was hoping for some fireworks. We didn't see a whole lot of points scored, and I did have Seattle +3, so that was a bummer. But again, if they had a couple timeouts at the end, maybe Geno Smith marches him down there and gets that backdoor cover, but didn't quite pan out that way, and it is a bummer with the Russell Wilson injury. Hopefully he's good to go for next week. But again, today on this show, we're going to be doing some Week 5 strategy stuff. I just uploaded the most recent batch of projections into the optimizer at FTN Daily. So if you guys aren't a subscriber and you want to check that out, you can use promo code KAMER to get yourself 20% off, and you can check that optimizer out each and every week. But right now, if you want to get a taste of it, we have the MLB optimizer for free throughout the playoffs. The playoff slate locked already today. They locked at 2 p.m., which is, again, I mentioned yesterday, the 4 o'clock game is a bit weird for MLB baseball, but in playoffs, they like to do that. And now today they had a 2 o'clock game. So the slate is locked for that. But again, if you want to use it for some showdown slates or maybe some future slates for the playoffs, it's going to be free for everybody for the rest of the playoffs. So make sure you're checking that out while you can, if you're interested in getting a peek at that. And then for basketball coming up, you guys will be able to get your hands on that. Unfortunately, you're not going to have any free trials of that, but if you're interested in getting the NBA early bird package, we still have that package running for $224.99 right now. So really excited about NBA season. Very pumped for NBA. As much as I like football, I am someone that's quite impatient, and I like the daily grind of everything. So football is awesome, and it's very unique because it's typically a 1 day slate. Obviously, you can play showdown slates and all that stuff, but when you're talking about like the main course, it's a 1 day sweat, and I typically like the everyday grind. So I do like everyday sports a lot. Obviously, football has its own reasons why I like that more than other sports, but NBA is exciting for me because you get back to that everyday mentality and everyday routine of NBA, which I really do enjoy. So really excited for that season. Going to have a ton of awesome content and tools up there for the FTN Daily subscribers. But without further ado, let's hop into this edition of the show. So again, taking a look at the optimizer here. We're going to run through the DraftKings slate for today, get a feel for what we're seeing on the board. Maybe run some lineups with the optimizer, but we're definitely going to run through some hand build lineups and see maybe options that we're liking based on correlation or projections or whatever it may be. So a couple of injury news things to talk about. Teddy Bridgewater is supposed to be in. I believe it's not necessarily a stone lock, but it is looking more so like that's going to be the case for Teddy Bridgewater than not when it comes to him playing this week. Christian McCaffrey is doubtful, so I'm assuming he's going to be out. I read a stat somewhere that players listed as doubtful over the last 5 or 10 years have had a less than 5% chance, or if they ended up playing less than 5% of the time. That's a pretty unique stat, and it makes a lot of sense. Doubtful players probably just not going to play. T. Higgins, he's in. A.J. Brown is in. Julio Jones is out, which is weird. I mean, I thought Julio Jones had a better shot at playing than A.J. Brown did last week, and now A.J. Brown's back from what I was concerned by, and now if he's going to be back here, again, people you're going to hear this narrative a lot this week, especially with the idea that maybe he's going to be limited, maybe he's not going to play, maybe he's going to be on a snap count. It's always a significant possibility, especially with somebody with that kind of soft tissue injury. However, I kind of have the idea that people in the NFL aren't just going to run out there if they aren't able to play at some capacity, right? Everyone's playing hurt. I mentioned that yesterday a little bit when we talked about the Dalvin Cook situation. So with that being the case, it's really hard to write people off just because of the fact that maybe they are a little bit banged up. If they're going to play, I'm assuming they're not risking their franchise wide receiver to have a further injury if he's going to be able to play here. So that is one thing to note, and that's kind of how I'm going to approach it. A couple other things I want to touch on real quick. When we're using the optimizer here live, we're going to try to run through how to use it for MME, but probably not going to do 150 lineups just because we're not going to be able to go through all 150 anyway. So if we're going to limit it to 10 to 20 lineups, that'll get a sense of how we're going to be building these lineups, but also give us a sense for what the lineups are actually doing. We can actually look through those lineups a bit more. But first of all, I want to touch on, let's look at what the optimal lineup would be based on projections right now. All right, I think the settings are good to go. We have to obviously abide by DraftKings community guidelines. I always forget to do that. No matter how many times I use this thing in a day. I always forget. DraftKings guidelines always got me. All right, so here's what the optimal lineup is looking like currently. Trey Lance in there. Trey Lance makes a lot of sense as to why he's in the optimal range. He's projecting pretty well. He's under 6K. And the reason why he's projecting well is because he does have pretty significant upside in terms of the rushing production. Obviously probably not as polished of a passer as other players on the slate are, but you don't really have a lot of rushing upside when you're talking about in comparison to what Trey Lance can do, especially down here in this pricing range. So Trey Lance makes a lot of sense as an optimal play. And again, you can see there's no pairings with him right now. And I don't really think that's quite necessary. I think you can definitely play Lance on his own. I think in tournaments, it probably makes more sense to play him with somebody just to add more upside to what he's potentially going to be able to do. Like, for example, if he gets 100 yards rushing and a touchdown, sure, that's probably very good score, and you're probably feeling pretty good about being able to win a tournament with it. But when you're talking about looking for that ultra ceiling game for Trey Lance, it probably comes with multiple passing touchdowns, 250 plus passing yards, and then, significant rushing work as well. So that's kind of where the massive ceiling game comes from Trey Lance. And that's probably why it makes a bit sense to maybe just pair him with one. Maybe you don't need to go all out and pair him with two. But I think in tournaments, makes sense to pair him up with a pass catcher, even though it's not 100% necessary. But in my opinion, I'd probably still do that the majority of the time. And then in cash games, not really necessary at all for Trey Lance. But all right, Leonard Fournette, DeAndre Swift, the two running backs in this lineup. Leonard Fournette makes a lot of sense. He's going to be the ultra chalk of the week. And one thing I really like to do, which when I'm doing these optimal lineups, I don't really play cash games. So when I'm running these optimal lineups, the reason why I do it is to get a feel for where the chalk is going to be. And I know you're going to think, well, you can just look at the ownership projections, right? That is true, but it's also really easy to get a feel for which way like the public is going to go with their lineup construction by running optimal builds. And whether you do it with these projections or whatever projections throughout the industry, running optimal type builds does give you a feel for which kind of combinations, which kinds of pairings are going to be popular, right? So I do like to do that. So like as you can see this week, it feels as if maybe Devontae Adams and Derrick Henry is going to be a popular combination, while the popular cheap guys going to be Leonard Fournette, even Jacoby Myers a bit. Ingram's going to be the cheap tight end. So you can get a feel for the good kind of the combinations that the public's going to be probably running out the majority of the time. And the reason why I think that's important is because you don't necessarily need to avoid chalk, right? Like the reason why these players are popular is because they typically have a good reason for being popular. Right? There's typically going to be a reason why they're a good play. So, with that being the case, sometimes it's a little bit more important to know which combinations give you an advantage when using the more popular plays. For example, like I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to come out and say, I'm just not playing Devontae Adams at all, or I'm just not playing Derrick Henry. Like it's going to be very hard to build lineups without playing any of these guys, right? So it can't be like a general rule where I'm just never going to play chalk. So there's going to be times where you have to play some of the popular plays. It's just that simple. So there could be a spot where you can look to find unique combinations or unique routes to playing certain chalk, right? So for example, Leonard Fournette, maybe pairing him with the Tom Brady lineup is a good way to be unique with Leonard Fournette, because Leonard Fournette's going to have some pretty solid work in the passing game. We've seen it over the last couple of weeks. We saw it significantly last week with no Giovanni Bernard. So again, maybe that's just one way that you wanted to pair him up with somebody to get unique. And even if it's not necessarily correlating people, right? You can say, I want to play Devontae Adams. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to play a Bengal. It could just mean, okay, if I'm going to play Devontae Adams, maybe I don't want to be too chalky. Maybe instead of spending up for Derrick Henry, I'll spend up for Alvin Kamara or for Dalvin Cook or Aaron Jones. And maybe you don't want to use Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams in the same line, but you get my point. So if vice versa, if you're paying up for Derrick Henry, maybe you say I don't want to spend up for the two most popular and most expensive plays in the slate. So maybe you'll separate Henry and Adams, or maybe you want both of those guys and you say, okay, I want to be a little bit more contrarian with the value people, with the value plays, and maybe then you try to get off of somebody like Swift or Fournette. So there's a couple reasons why I run the optimal lineup, even though I don't play cash games a whole lot. I haven't played cash once this year. I played it a couple times last year, I think. But overall, I don't play it a whole lot. But there are multiple reasons as to why finding these types of optimal plays and these cash plays are important. And that's a couple of reasons why. But another reason why is it's pretty cool to see Jalen Waddle right there, 5% in the optimal lineup. Like that's typically a play that I'm going to like a lot. If you're projecting well enough to be, popping optimal lineups, it makes a lot of sense. And right away, you can see that Leonard Fournette and him correlate. Obviously, they're playing each other. So that correlation and maybe offsetting some of that popularity that Leonard Fournette's going to have with a lower owned Jalen Waddle. I mean, that's right away a very interesting contrarian. Well, not quite contrarian, but you're kind of offsetting the ownership. But it's a correlation that's a pretty cheap correlation that I really like this week. And even Jacoby Myers at just 12%, like that's places that I like to find within building these optimal lineups. So that's a couple reasons why typically every week I'll start by running the optimal lineup to see kind of what the landscape of the slate is. It's also good to see the typical total ownership if you're looking to cap the ownership of your lineup over here. For example, this ownership cap is going to change. Like you can't just it's hard to just set it at the same number and forget it for, the whole season, right? Like, for example, um, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a really good example, but let's say next week, a starting running back gets hurt in practice on a Wednesday, right? And we already have the pricing out, and a running back's going to be 4K, and he's going to, get 20 touches. He's going to be, 50, 60% chalk, right? That's a good spot to where you're probably going to assume that the average ownership of typical lineups are going to be much higher, right? So that's where you want to run these lineups to kind of see what the typical ownership is going to be, and then you can make a decision based on your cap. So now I'm assuming like the top end of lineups is going to be about 150. So if I wanted to make a decision and say, okay, I want all my lineups to be under 125% projected ownership, and it's also going to depend on what kind of contest you're playing and whatnot. For example, if you're playing in a contest like the Million Maker, you're probably looking for a lower number here. But there are other ways to offset popularity in this optimizer here. So one way, our guy Elliot does a great job rating up 10 players under 10% ownership each and every week, and he talks about this little feature right here. The force, I call it the force features, like it's Star Wars or something. I don't know, but you can force at least one player at whatever position under whatever projected ownership you want in each lineup. So what I typically like to do is I like to force one wide receiver under 10%. Sometimes I'll do 15%, but usually it's just 10%. I like to force one wide receiver under 10% in each lineup. And the reason why I like to do that is because then I'm giving the optimizer a little bit of more leniency with some of these chalky plays, knowing that I'll automatically have some kind of contrarian, asset to each lineup, right? Whether it be someone like Jalen Waddle here at 5%, or that's just telling me that no matter how chalky a lineup possibly gets, I'll always have at least one person that's under 10%. And I think that's pretty important for tournaments. Typically, you want a couple. The more, the merrier. But you don't necessarily want to sacrifice playing good plays, especially great plays, in order to get someone who's just not as strong of a play. It's a fine line. I always will side towards playing lower owned players, and I like to use that as a tiebreaker. But for example, if you're just not feeling like two people are the same, I don't think it's you don't want to necessarily give up that edge on a player because of ownership, right? I think there are plenty of other ways to make up ownership. And I think that when you're thinking about your popularity of your lineup, you should be thinking about it as a lineup as a whole, not as individual players. For example, if you're thinking about it as individual players only, you're probably going to make your way off of guys like Devontae Adams and Derrick Henry and Leonard Fournette, who are all pretty good plays this week. They're all grading out pretty solid, especially when you're talking about Leonard Fournette as a value play. So if you're instantly writing these guys off because of their individual ownership, it's going to be tough to ever capitalize on a week where the chalk does well, and that's going to happen, right? So far this year, the chalk's done well every week. I think the real secret is to be able to balance out unique lineups around some of these chalky players. So that's kind of how I've been trying to approach it, and I think that's kind of what I would recommend. Let's see if the ownership has changed at all from yesterday. Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, Trey Lance, that looks about the same. Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette, James Robinson, Najee Harris. DeAndre Swift went up a little bit, but that looks about the same as well. Just got a report that Garoppolo was a DNP today, and looks like Trey Lance is likely to start Sunday. So that'll kind of solidify some things for the slate. I think that pretty much locks in a lot of the injury news, I believe. I'm sure there's a couple of other names that will pop up, but that was the big one that we were left thinking about with him and the Tennessee guys and T. Higgins a little bit. But, it was never really a thing that Trey Lance wasn't going to start. I think it was very unlikely that Garoppolo was going to play from the beginning. But as for wide receivers, Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb, like I mentioned, those guys, I think, when we're talking about looking for potential fades, I think Cooper and Lamb make a ton of sense this week. Amari Cooper played less than 50% of snaps because of injuries last week, and I'm a massive Amari Cooper guy. I think he's one of the most underrated receivers in the league, and I think that's even saying something considering how good he has been and how much people have realized that he's good since he went to Dallas, right? But this is a guy who's hurt a lot. The matchup is one that I think is probably middle tier. Like, it's nothing great, nothing too bad. My issue is the scheme that we've seen from Dallas over the last 3 weeks. I mentioned it yesterday, 43% pass rate over the last 3 weeks. And again, that's a pretty small sample. We've only played 4 games, and that was referring to the last 3 games. But it's been pretty it's been pretty drastic, right? How often they're looking to run the ball. And now with the fact that they're looking to run the ball with both Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, it makes a little bit of a headache here. So the way I kind of feel about this is like it would be, for example, right now. Obviously, before I preface this, it should be I should preface this by saying this is going to be a very drastic example, right? But Cooper and Lamb chalk would be like us having Sammy Watkins and Marquise Brown chalk, and I get it. That's dramatic, right? I'm pulling examples of players that aren't the same. Like obviously, Cooper and Lamb are much better players than Hollywood Brown and Sammy Watkins. However, Baltimore, they run the ball a lot. They are a team that is looking to continually run the ball, and Dallas is looking like that as well. And even if they change that this week, the fact that they're popular leads me to think that this could be a spot to potentially try to find some leverage and get off of these guys here, especially considering the kind of pivots that you have in this range. Like even when you look at the projections, right? Let's talk about projections here down here in this range. So even when you look at the projections alone, you have Godwin, Keenan Allen, Brandon Cooks, Kenny Galladay, even like these guys are all projected. Jacoby Myers, these guys are all projecting for similar kind of production for me. So there's so many pivots in this range. Cooks under 10%, Godwin's at 15%, so you're not really getting a massive discount there. But even Deontay Johnson at 5%, and in a tough matchup, but still, Adam Thielen a little bit more expensive, but 9% ownership. Like there are plenty of pivots in this range. And it's actually shocking to me that these guys are as popular as they are. Like I get it. Like everyone loves these Cowboys. Everyone loves them. And I think that's for good reason, right? Like they're all supreme talents and they are one of the more dynamic passing weapons and passing games in the entire NFL when they're throwing the ball. We saw it in week 1, but they're just not throwing the ball right now. And people are, I guess, assuming that that's going to change here. They do have the highest team total on the slate, so that makes some sense as well. But it's not like it's not like we're left without options, right? I think there are plenty of options in this range, plenty of options if you want to save some money, maybe find some salary to spend up a little bit more. So plenty of spots. So I think these guys are going to be for sure. I'm for sure going to have the majority. Like if I do have Lamb and Cooper, it's probably going to be in a stack. I'm probably not going to play them as one-offs. Just because they're so popular. And I think there are plenty of strong pivots here. If I had to pick one between Lamb or Cooper, it is definitely Lamb. I think Amari Cooper being more popular than Lamb is actually crazy. People aren't concerned about this injury at all, apparently. They aren't concerned about there's a lot of concerns for Amari Cooper right now. And he's 21% projected ownership. That is one of the highest on the board. He's the 4th most popular player of the week. People aren't concerned about this ownership at all, apparently, which is very interesting. I'm actually very interested by that. Like if Amari Cooper was going to be low owned, I think it'd be super interesting if people were worried about the owners, worried about the passing game, and worried about the injury stuff, and he was going to be 4% owned. I think that would be super interesting, but that's not the case. And I think it's a good spot to just work against the field here and look for some other options. And it's not like I mentioned, it's not like we're left without options here. There are plenty of pivots and potential leverage plays in this same range, whether it be spending up a little bit more, saving a little bit, but there's plenty of room to work there. But all right, let's try to build a lineup here. We're going to take a look at the stacking model. So the stacking model is what I post every week on the site. And as you can see, Dallas ranking first in the stacking model. I actually think this needs to be updated. Yeah, I have an update on this. And Tampa Bay is actually number 1 in the stacking model. Give me 1 second. I'm actually going to update this real quick. I thought I updated it this morning. I apparently did not. So yeah, I mean, the way I see it in terms of how popular they're going to be as a stack is if you're playing this team as a stack, I think it makes more sense to use those popular guys and then look to get contrarian elsewhere, because if you are stacking this Dallas team, right, they probably aren't failing like Cooper and Lamb if they hit their ceiling. So I think that makes sense. But again, like Dak Prescott, the fact that he even got to where he was last week was a borderline miracle, considering the fact that he threw the ball 20 times. He did throw for 4 touchdowns, I believe it was. But overall, just like, it was pretty much a miracle that he got to 27 DraftKings points. So yeah, as you can see, Tampa Bay is actually number one in the stack rater by a pretty wide margin now. And they have the best percentage chance to be the top stack of the week. They have the highest edge percentage, which is basically the top percentage compared to their ownership. So they are going to be the third most popular team, but considering how much more popular the two teams ahead of them are going to be, aka Dallas and New York, in that game, they have the best chance to have the best leverage of the slate, pretty much. So again, I really like Tampa as well, and like I mentioned, Dallas, New York, top two teams in terms of projected ownership. And when you're talking team total, right? Like we mentioned Dallas at 29.5, but we have Minnesota at 29.5 as well, and they're the sixth most popular team. You have Tampa Bay, who's the third most popular team, and Green Bay, who's about 3 points behind them as the seventh most popular team. And then you get really into the weeds, and you're talking Tennessee, who are about 3 points behind them as the 13th most popular team. Arizona, same thing, about 3 points. Actually, it is 3 points on the dot, fourth most popular team, and then Las Vegas at about 4.5 points behind them at the ninth most popular team. So there are plenty of ways to get a little bit different here, right? So I think it's obviously it's a spot where Dallas can come out throwing the ball a bit more, and they can see some more success in that department. But it is a bit strange to me that they're still as popular as they are. I think that is pretty wild. It was not something that I was expecting. Like, I get it because they are cheap. Like it is still, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper at 6'1" and 6'2". So I think overall, like that is just the end all be all, and that's why they're going to be popular. But it's not like they're even elite values in comparison to the rest of the slate. Like there's still plenty of other options here that are grading out similarly, right? CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, yeah, they're both in the top 10 in terms of value. But we have Chris Godwin, we have Keenan Allen, who I'm actually surprised to see the 16%. Like again, that's because of price. Brandon Cooks, who his target share has been elite, tough matchup, sure, but we've seen him have success with any quarterback so far this year. So again, plenty of options there, but all right, using the stacking tool, we're going to run and try to build some lineups here. Tom Brady, let's lock him in there with that Tampa Bay team. Let's go ahead and get rid of everybody here and see what kind of Tampa Bay players we like to stack the most here. So in terms of ceiling, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, 25 or more, with Mike Evans having the highest ceiling, Antonio Brown having the lowest, but Antonio Brown is also the cheapest. I think right now, in terms of popularity, it makes a lot of sense to throw in Mike Evans there. I actually think it makes a lot of sense to pay up for Mike Evans over Godwin, and then use Antonio Brown as well. Not using Tyler Johnson in a stack, but Mike Evans and Antonio Brown's probably going to be my de facto correlation with Tom Brady this week. However, I also think it makes some sense to use Leonard Fournette in this one. Leonard Fournette's been heavily involved in the passing game. Let me look up the target shares real quick. So over the last 3 weeks, keep in mind Antonio Brown did miss a game, but over the last 3 weeks, Chris Godwin only has 17 targets. Antonio Brown has 14 while missing a game, and Mike Evans has 31 targets. So it's looking like Mike Evans is slowly working his way into that strong alpha receiver. Obviously, it's a small sample. In week 1, we saw Chris Godwin dominate the targets, but on the season, Mike Evans 21%, Godwin 17.5, Antonio Brown just under 17. Rob Gronkowski's at about 15, but he's going to be out again this week. Giovanni Bernard at 11%, he's out again this week. Leonard Fournette just under 11%. So with all these vacated targets between Gronk and Bernard, I think that makes a lot of sense for the secondary guys like Fournette and like Antonio Brown. Fournette had 5 targets last week. He has 12 over the last 3 weeks. And I think he makes a lot of sense as a potential pairing with Brady. I know some people don't love to do that, but a lot of the value for Fournette is going to come through the air, right? That's where the high value touches. Fournette had about 90 yards on the ground last week against New England, and that was like his probably optimal outcome there for a rushing game. He's probably not going to get a whole lot more than that unless he's hyper efficient and has a couple of big plays. And obviously that's very possible too. But overall, I think Leonard Fournette is going to come, when he has those big games, it's going to come those 5-6 catch games. Obviously finding the end zone is going to help as well. But I think pairing him up with Tom Brady makes sense. Again, it's not optimal. Obviously, it's probably not the ideal situation, but with how cheap Fournette is, I think you can get away with it if you want to do that in some tournaments. But overall, I think Evans and Brown would be my ideal pairing here. So let's run a couple lineups here. Let Whoops, gotta add these teams back. Let's run a few lineups here and see what these lineups with those stacks are looking like. All right, so now this one, it gave me, okay, I messed something up here. One sec. Okay, there we go. All right, so with the idea of stacking up, actually, I'm going to do it this way. With the idea of stacking up Tom Brady, and we want to make sure that we're going to pair him up with those two receivers in particular. Now, again, these are if you're looking for specific stack ideas. So we're doing 10 lineups. I believe we have 10 lineups. If you're looking to do specific stack ideas, you can leave certain players out of these exposures here. But say you're building 150 lineups and you wanted to get different exposures, you would want to make adjustments to these max ownership. So with Tom Brady, we're going to pair him with no less than two, and probably no more than two as well. And we'll say in 10 lineups. All right, so for this specific scenario, no Ronald Jones, no OJ Howard, no Tyler Johnson. Cameron Brate's fine. Antonio Brown will limit him to 50%. Mike Evans, 75%. Actually, we're going to bump up Antonio Brown. All right, so earlier I was trying to build more specific lineups with just Godwin or with just Evans and Brown, but I actually wanted to run through the stacking feature here and show potentially what you can do with these lineups here. And for those of you who are building 150 lineups, maybe 20 plus lineups, you're going to really want to utilize these exposures to the players within the stack. You know, we've seen it over the last couple of weeks where, for example, Kyler Murray, you're looking to play Kyler Murray with Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins, and I think it was week 3, and didn't really pan out, right? You wanted AJ Green and Christian Kirk. That's kind of why it's important to be able to diversify within that stack, especially if you're building, several lineups. So that's very important. So, all right, Tom Brady in a minimum of 10 lineups. So in each game or each lineup, we want two players, exactly two players. So you can set it to no less than one and no more than up to three. I typically don't like to pair a quarterback up with three, and sometimes I'm okay with saying just pair him up with at least one. But with Tom Brady, if he's going to have a big ceiling game, he's probably throwing 4 touchdowns, and if that's going to be the case, probably we get to see several receivers hit ceiling games. So this is just a Tampa Bay stack. Now, if you wanted to include some run backs here, here's where we would look at this screen. And so there's a couple guys instantly that you probably want to get rid of, these low projected players. Instantly just get rid of them. The big news here is potentially Devontae Parker, I guess, could potentially be out now as well. Jalen Waddle, like I'm to a point where I'm actually okay with like Jalen Waddle 100% in run backs with Tom Brady. I probably won't do that a ton of the time, and the optimizer probably won't even allow that because they are going to get some Parker and some Gesicki in there as well. But overall, I really like Waddle this week. We'll cap Parker at, we'll say 75%, and we'll cap Gesicki at 50%. All right, so this is kind of what our game stack is going to look like, right? So obviously, we're probably not going to want to run a massive amount of run backs. You can do up to 2 or 3. I typically leave it at 1. Sometimes I'll do 2, but for this game in particular, I'm just going to leave it at 1. All right, so that one is in there. Now let's run these lineups here and see what we get. We're going to go back to tournament mode. Unique players doesn't really matter for right now. But if you're building, 150 lineups, you probably do want to ensure that you're going to get 100. You're probably going to want to ensure that you're getting those unique players in there. But let's check out the kinds of lineups that we got here. All right, so Tom Brady paired with Waddle, paired with Brown and Evans. And then we actually have a secondary stack in there as well. DeAndre Swift paired with Tyler Conklin. Same stack here, Brady with Brown and Evans, paired with Waddle. James Robinson, Ferkser as a secondary stack. So yeah, a lot of these stacks are looking pretty similar here, which makes a lot of sense because of the projections on these guys and the kinds of exposures that we left them at. Now, for example, if you're building your lineups and you're seeing that there's a lot of scenarios where it's just a lot of the same players, which this is kind of the same deal, right? And obviously we only built 10 lineups, so that's probably going to be pretty popular and pretty common. but it could be a spot where maybe you want to lower the ownership on some of these guys here. So maybe in the 10 lineups, we're going to say 25% is going to be Evans. We're going to say cap it at 25% Antonio Brown, and 25% Godwin, maybe 20% Fournette. You want to play with these exposures here to get a good feel for what it takes to get certain players in there. So we're also going to cap some of these guys here. That's a good feel for just kind of getting individual game stacks, or I guess it's not even really a game stack at that point. It's more so just a spot where you're looking to get a run back in there. But Tom Brady paired with Waddle or paired with Brown and Evans, brought it back with Waddle, and then similar stack here. So it looks like these running back and tight end stacks are very common. That's something that they're utilizing a whole lot of, which makes a lot of sense because we're using this running back plus opposing team pass catcher. So running back plus a wide receiver or a tight end, which is something that I do like to do. But yeah, typically these are the three that I actually had this one checked. I typically don't check that one. I want this one checked, the running back plus defense from the same team. I think that one's fine to have. It's not going to force these stacks into every lineup, but it's going to, obviously run the lineup. And if it works out as a positive stack, they're going to throw that in there when possible. And then wide receiver plus opposing team pass catcher. That was like, for example, when we built that optimal lineup, how we saw Jacoby Myers paired with Fournette. That would be like what this rule is right here. And then obviously it works pretty much the same way, just with a wide receiver rather than a running back. So that's a couple of ways to get a good feel for how the stacking function is going to work there. And like I mentioned, this Tom Brady stack is something that I'm very high on. And it's probably going to be my highest owned stack of the week, I believe. Again, they're number one in the model for me. Let's see who's number two right now. Number two is Dallas. Number three is Minnesota. I think Minnesota is pretty interesting as well, because we have a unique situation where there's so many spots in terms of looking for who we're actually going to pair Kirk Cousins up with. And I think that is kind of a question mark in terms of how deep you actually want to go. Like for Tom Brady, we had 4 or 5 guys included in the stack, right? But for Kirk Cousins, you're probably not going too far deep. Like Abdullah, easy to write off. Conklin, I guess, is fine for now. Madison, you're writing off. Cook, you might like a little bit there. But guys like Thielen and Jefferson, those are the kinds of guys that you want to have high exposure to here in terms of stacking with Cousins. So KJ Osborne, he's looked pretty involved, so he'll probably be about 40% or so. But now the Lions, on the other hand, you definitely, in my opinion, you're definitely going to want to cap this at 1. Probably not wanting multiple Lions in your lineup in general, let alone pretty much just in general. The Lions are not a great team to have massive exposure to. Benson will probably get rid of. Yeah, basically for me, like I would probably want to limit this to just Hawkinson or DeAndre Swift. That's probably kind of how I would feel best about it. One important thing about this is to make sure you don't close the stacking tool, because otherwise it'll essentially disable it. So when you have it open, that is essentially telling the optimizer that it's enabled and it's good to go and good to use. So make sure you're keeping that open while you run it. But all right, let's run it here and see what we get for these kinds of stacks. Oh, I think I still have Tom Brady locked in, actually. Yeah, that's a mistake. All right, so you want to make sure that you don't have these players locked in. That makes sense. That makes sense as to why we were saying those kinds of stacking builds. All right, now let's run it. So again, right now we're looking to just do Minnesota and Tampa Bay stacks. And let's see here. So if you're also looking to sort just by the quarterback, Tom Brady. Okay, so this one went all Tom Brady. That's how much better Tom Brady is projecting than Kirk Cousins. But as you can see now, we're getting Godwin in there. We're getting those secondary stacks in there more. We're getting some Leonard Fournette pairings in there. So that makes some sense. And then if you're having an issue with that, come over here and have these quarterbacks at 50% here. So Kirk Cousins lineups paired with Justin Jefferson, brought back with DeAndre Swift, and then here's that secondary stack wide receiver plus Waddle plus Brate there. Waddle plus Fournette's going to be a stack I like a lot. Cousins paired with Jefferson, brought back with Swift. So yeah, these are lineups that I'm liking a pretty good amount actually. Like this one right here, I think is super interesting. Cousins paired with Jefferson, brought back with Swift. Fournette paired with Waddle. I think Fournette paired with Waddle is going to end up being one of my more popular builds of the week, or I guess popular combinations of the week. Cousins with Jefferson paired with Swift, or brought back with Swift. Leonard Fournette paired with Jalen Waddle. So yeah, that's a couple of interesting things there as well. So overall, just getting a feel for how some of these stacks are working. So there we didn't get enough Adam Thielen in there, and that's probably when you're going to want to utilize the unique players and probably the randomization a little bit as well. But overall, that is basically how I'm trying to build these stacks within the optimizer. And you can use this in several scenarios, right? It doesn't only need to be 150 lineups. It can be, if you're looking to do 5 lineups. A lot of times when I'm struggling to hand build, I will just run a couple of lineups in the optimizer and see kind of the direction that it's taking me. And if I like that kind of direction, I'll run with it. But also, it does give you at times it gives you a good idea of where you might want to go here. But overall, that is kind of how I am building stacks within the optimizer right now. Obviously, we only ran 20 lineups there, but when you're building 150, you're probably going to want more stacks here built into it. But there's also the universal rule. So the universal rule is basically saying no matter what, anytime a different quarterback pops into the lineups, it's going to stack at least one wide receiver or one pass catcher with that quarterback, and that's what it did here with Dak. So we didn't ask for a Dak specific lineup, but it got us a Dak lineup, so it automatically paired him with the wide receiver, which is important. You don't really ever want quarterbacks paired without a pass catcher there. And if you don't like that, which in my opinion you probably should, but you can turn it off if that's how you feel about it. But overall, I think it's something that you should do unless you're going through, every single team and you're realizing, okay, every team that I want to stack, every quarterback that I'm going to have exposure to, except for maybe Trey Lance, maybe I don't want to pair him with anybody, then you can turn this off and then just build those stacks out for everybody. But you can also add a correlation boost here, which is something that we should probably talk about. Correlation boost is basically saying that if these players are in a lineup, it's going to add a 30% correlation boost. I believe it's 30%. Yeah, 30% correlation boost to that player's projection. Basically just saying that if they're in a stack, the reason why you're looking to stack them is because you're stacking them in hopes of a ceiling game. So this 30% boost is just applying ceiling type projections to the player within that stack. So that is basically the idea behind the correlation boost. You can turn those on, turn those off, whatever you want to do there. And then there are other ways to stack as well. I typically use the correlation stacking system, but we also have the legacy stacking system, which you can do a little bit more kind of hand build type stuff where, Kyler Murray, pair him with no less than one player of wide receiver, tight end from the same team. Could throw that in there, etc. But you can also then say Kyler Murray, no less than one player of, you could probably add in a running back there too from the opposing team. You can build stacks out that way without necessarily having to do certain players. You can still use certain players here. You can still say no less than one of Hopkins, Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, AJ Green. Well, you can still do that as well. And then you can also include the run backs. So if you want to say, okay, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel, that's kind of where you would build in these more hand build lineups or hand build stacks, I suppose. Maybe you want to bump that up to 2, and you can do stacks that way as well. But again, if you have this closed, it's going to disable the stack until you open that up. And once it's open, it'll be completely enabled. But I do prefer the correlation stacking system. It just allows me to get a bit more descriptive with who I want within these stacks. So for example, if I'm making sure that I'm capping ownership at a certain number within the stack, I know that if I'm having, 15% Tom Brady stack lineups, I'm going to have, ample ownership to guys like Brate and Brown and Fournette and whoever I want included there, right? Same thing goes for, Kirk Cousins. Like if I am stacking Kirk Cousins, I can make sure that I am getting enough exposure to guys like KJ Osborne and Conklin. I guess like a good example would be someone like Josh Allen or on this slate, Kyler Murray, right? So if you did Kyler Murray, you could say, if I have Kyler, let's just do that one real quick. in 10 lineups, I can make sure that I'm, getting some Rondale Moore. I can make sure I'm getting some AJ Green, some Christian Kirk, some Chase Edmonds, even in stacking lineups, Max Williams. I can ensure that I am going to be getting those types of players and those types of options within the builds, right? Because you don't want to get left in a spot where you're super high on somebody like I'm trying to think of a really good example. Like, for example, Daniel Jones. Like, if you're super high on Daniel Jones, you don't want to get left in a spot where you have, 20% Daniel Jones lineups. And since a lot of the optimizers and projections are steering you towards guys like Galladay and Ingram, or you just don't have any Kadarius Toney, or maybe you don't have any John Ross or Colin Johnson. Like, if you have all this exposure to the Giants passing game, it's gonna be very easy to just get a little bit of Toney or Johnson or John Ross. And you don't want to be left in a spot where you're without exposure to those guys because of the stacking system that you're working with. So it's a very good tool in terms of making sure you're getting exposure to guys within those stacks. But I think that's it for what we're going to cover on this one. We're about at the hour mark. If you guys have any questions before I get out of here, shoot those in there and I will answer those live on the show. But appreciate you guys tuning in here. It was a blast. We're going to be back every Monday through Friday, running through different stuff each and every day. And Fridays are going to be like the lineup strategy session type shows. I'm still trying to sort out the actual schedule, trying to play it by ear to see what kind of works best. And obviously, it'll change a lot as different sports appear and disappear and all that stuff. But we also have some golf going on right now, and we also have some baseball going on right now. So hopefully we have plenty of sweats going on for everybody in different sports. And, it is going to be one of the more busy times of years for everybody here because we have 4 sports right now. We're doing preseason NBA. NFL is here, obviously. Baseball is in postseason mode, which is always fun. And then PGA. And there's other sports too. Like we have esports stuff. I think, I do owe Mr. Hobby Plazo a shout out. I believe he took down the League of Legends Worlds GPPs. He had a 1K takedown, and then a sub took down almost 10K the other night in esports League of Legends, which is pretty cool. I remember during the pandemic, I wasn't the only one. A lot of people got very into League of Legends, and it was actually, I'm not even gonna lie, it was a blast. I was staying up till 7 a.m. sweating Chinese League of Legends. It'll definitely hold a fond spot in my heart for a very long time for what it did for me during the pandemic when we didn't have any sports or anything like that. It definitely provided some entertainment. So we have that going on as well. I believe NASCAR's in the full swing. I believe Talladega was last week. I think. I don't know. I'm the wrong guy to ask. But I think I'm almost positive Bubba Wallace won, which is very cool. So that was cool. And yeah, we have tons of sports going on right now. So hop on over to FTN Daily. FTN Bets, we actually have all sports looped into one package right now. So one monthly price for all the sports, which is fantastic because what I like to do to make money is use Josh Gross's tennis picks. That guy does not miss. He's had a very good year, pretty much in all sports, but especially in tennis. So it's very cool that we have all sports wrapped into one. And again, promo code KMUR gets you 20% off. But I appreciate you guys all tuning in. This was a lot of fun. We'll be back next Monday. Gonna take the weekend off, but I won't be gone. I'll be doing a Friday show at FTN Daily at 5 p.m. So an hour from now, about a little over an hour. And then Sunday morning live stream as well. So again, if you're looking to tune into that, we're going to be talking a ton of NFL stuff over the course of the weekend here. And if you are a subscriber, hop into that Discord. Saturday nights, we have the Discord absolutely going crazy all night long. Like I like to stay up very late on Saturday nights, building lineups and all that stuff. So we typically have that Discord bumping up until pretty much all night, all morning, from Saturday night until Sunday when the games lock. That's what everyone is doing in Discord. Kind of makes me wonder how people survive Sundays, because I don't even know how I survive Sundays. I'm like a zombie on Sundays. But that'll do it for the show, guys. Appreciate you tuning in. We will see you next time. Until then, good luck, everybody.